Page 47, Tractate Círuvin. We're going to discuss today a situation a woman lost her husband, young one, and the question is how quickly we allow her to go ahead and marry someone else, or in a situation like Yibum, a Levirate marriage. The big question involved with this is she may be pregnant with or without her husband, her deceased, knowledge. Certain period of time needed. And with that, we need to compare it to our discussion of yesterday, which is the discussion of disputation between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon in regards to Eiruvin, particularly Eiruvei Chatzerot, the Eruv of different courtyards. The Gemara tells us on page 86, which Mitzvah Shem we're going to study, a unique situation, which is someone leave his house and has no intent to return on Shabbat. Meaning, we have some situation that people wants to have Eruvei Chatzerot, which is sharing within the development. The whole member of that development need to share together the Eruv in order for them to carry from one domain to another. Yet one of the people who leave there, he basically move out for the weekend. And here is the discussion, especially if it's a situation that it's a Jew, because if it's a non-Jew, it's relatively simple. He basically annul his ownership. But if it's a Jew, the big question is, if it's not far away, if he went to visit, for example, his daughter, can he basically partake and then leave for the weekend? So let's see, we are on page 47. Ela meha detnan, 4 lines from the top of the page. המניח את ביתו והלך לשבות בעיר אחרת, אחד נוכרי ואחד ישראל אוסר לבני חצרות. If someone left his home before Shabbat and he dwell in a different location, can be a different city or different neighborhood, and he did not participate with everyone else in the Eruv of the Chatzerot, of the courtyard. So they said, regardless if it's a Jew or non-Jew, and now you ask me a question, if it's a non-Jew, what's the issue? He is not partaking of this Eruv, and his domain did not forbid for other Jews to carry from their domain to the courtyard. So they said, אחד נוכרי ואחד ישראל אוסר לבני חצרות. Regardless if it's a Jew or non-Jew, he forbade all the people in that yard to carry from their house to the yard and vice versa. Meaning, regardless if you return or not, we don't care. It's basically say that he forbids to everyone else from carrying. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer eino oser. Rabbi Yehuda said, if he's outside of that city, he will not return to that domain, and therefore he allow the others to carry as long as they made the Eruvei Chatzerot. Why? Because he's not there. So again, so far what we understand, if it's a Jew, he need to partake of the Eruv. If it's a non-Jew, he need to annul his ownership. But he said, as long as he's not there and he's not returning, so everyone else can carry. Rabbi Yossi Omer, נוכרי אוסר, ישראל אינו אוסר, מפני שאין דרך ישראל לבוא בשבת. He said, if it's a non-Jew, he forbade everyone else to use it. Why? Because he is part of the development. Imagine if you have a development, especially those who have a chance to go to Florida, their second home, half of the time. So you're living in a development that sometimes, let's say if you live in Boca Raton, or you live in Aventura, Delray Beach, all those places, you have many developments that mainly occupied by Jews. Now, you need to pay whatever fee involved for the gatekeepers, for people who maintain the development. Even many times it's independent development and you own your house, yet there are basic fees involved with that development since you are partake of that management. There are more, there are less, depends, but usually in my experiences in Florida, you need to pass the gate, you have someone who cut the grass for everyone in that development, etc. So there are certain basic fees, more or less, you pay as part of that development. Meaning, for our discussion, since you are part of development, makes no difference if you are Jew or non-Jew, you are part, you are number X out of all of those inhabitants of that specific development, and most of the development has a name for those places. With that in mind, the idea that a non-Jew is a part of that development force us to ask him to annul his ownership in order for us to make the Eiruvei Chatzerot for the entire development, so people can carry it from one domain to another. So he said, if it's a non-Jew, in our modern language, in those days it wasn't car, in our modern language he can turn on the engine and he comes back on Saturday. In those days, let's say they use donkey or whatever it is, right? So they said, if it's a non-Jew, he doesn't care for the Shabbat limits. So it's a chance for him to return on Shabbat to his house. But if it's a Jew, so what happened is, he is limited to 2,000 cubits, and therefore, in a sense, the Meiri said that he does not have in his mind, Mesiach Da'ato, he's not focusing in his mind to return, and therefore it's very low possibility that he planning to come back, and you can make an Eiruvei Chatzerot, especially if he partake in advance, even he's leaving. Rabbi Shimon אומר, אפילו הניח ביתו והלך לשבות אצל ביתו באותה העיר, אינו אוסר מפני שכבר הסיח דעתו. So Rabbi Meir said, even he left his house and he went to his daughter that live in the same city. So since we talk about Florida, if I'm not mistaken, Delray Beach and Boca are very close. So let's say he went to visit his daughter in Delray Beach before Shabbat, and it is a possibility for a regular situation. In our generation, there are people who marry young and have the children young, so he can go and visit his daughter while walking from one domain to another. So they said, Ein bo diurin, it's not considering that he's dwelling there. Why are they using the daughter? Anybody have an idea? The Gemara tells us later that with his daughter it's a chance to have arguments, and he quit. He just can't take the argument and he leave. Soon you see it. But the key point is that even in that situation, he can go ahead and partake of the Eruv, or annul his ownership in that sense, and he's not having his mind to return. Now, you see here that Rabbi Shimon is lenient, and he said we follow halacha according to Rabbi Shimon. So we ask, Man Paligale, who is the one who disagrees with Rabbi Shimon? It has to be Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because what we said in Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda said that only if he goes to another city far away, he does not forbid of others in that development. But if he went to another house, the same city, so he forbids upon them to carry. But according to Rabbi Shimon, even if he went to visit his daughter that live the same city, just a different development or different house, his domain not forbids others. The truth is, in the Mishnah you see also Rabbi Yossi disagree with Rabbi Shimon. So we can prove the way that Rav Mesharshia said, because remember the rules we said that Rabbi Yochanan said the rule that halacha follow Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Shimon. But here anyway he said that we go lenient when we follow Rabbi Shimon. So Rashi said that we just, the Gemara here pick and choose one of those sources. Uman Paligale, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda disagree with him. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yehuda. Remember we just said it yesterday? So they said, Umay Krushya, what's the problem? Dilma hachanami eichad itmar itmar, eichad lo itmar, itmar perhaps to where it states specifically that the halacha is according to Rabbi Shimon, it's stated. But where it's not stated explicitly, it's not stated, so which means the principle that halacha is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda applies. Ela. Now we need to bring another source. Mehadetnan. We learn page 49b. The whole process of making a place a dwelling place. So if someone is in a journey and he doesn't have enough food for the purpose of the Eruv, so he can dwell in whatever is he without putting an Eruv there. So the Mishnah concluded and said, V'zeu she'amru, and that's what the sages said, He'ani me'arev beraglav, which means a poor person cannot afford meals, so he depends sometimes on others, on communities or sponsorship, etc. So he can make an Eruv by going the place that he's there, and he basically stand there and he dwell there, receive the status of shvita, he dwelling there, and therefore if a person who cannot afford to have this type of food in the place of the Eruv, he can use his physical fit to go there and stand there. And he said, in that sense, even he's not so poor, because there are some poor people who cannot afford to have the food, so we said it's enough to use his feet. Rabbi Meir Omer, Anu ein lanu ela ani. We cannot allow anybody to do a place of permanent residency for Shabbat without using food, but only a indigent, someone who cannot afford. But someone who's rich that needs to bring some proof, something involved with food, he needs to have a food that maintains 2 meals. Rashi here said, Anu en lanu ela ani, שיכול לקנות שביתה ברגליו בלא עירוב פת אלא אני, that he can dwell without being prepare 2 meals, כלומר מישהו בדרך ואין עמו פת, someone, he is traveler and somehow by force of circumstance he does not have a bread with him. So in my book ביאורי הכלומר ברש"י על הש"ס, I explained it's based on the Meiri, that the ani, in that sense, the poor person, Rashi have an issue here, because if you look at the sugya, you see the way that is discussed here, we're not talking about ani, meaning someone who's poor. What we understand? We understand that it has to be someone that cannot carry at this point. So Rashi used the word klomar to tell us, don't think here we are specifically talking about a poor person, but what we speak about circumstance that the person doesn't have a bread with him or food with him, and therefore in that situation, at that very moment, he is ani, he is poor. So it's not necessarily someone who's totally depend on sponsorship. So he said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Echad ani ve'echad ashir, regardless if it's a poor or rich person, they can use their feet to make an eruv. Lo amru me'arvin bepat, they did not say that you should use a bread to make the eruv, ela le'akel le'ashir, שלא יצא ויערב ברגליו, that we want to be lenient with a rich person, that he should not go out and make an eruv using his feet, which means he can use an emissary to carry that bread, but if he wants to go by himself, he can use his feet and it's fine. Umatnelei, and this Mishnah was taught by Rabbi Chia bar Ashi lechia bar Rav kamei de Rav, that he said echad ani ve'echad ashir, both allow to use their feet. V'amar lei Rav said to Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, sayem banamei halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda, you should conclude with your point, the final halacha, that it's go by the Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara asks, Tartei lamali, why I need to have 2 halachot by Rabbi Yehuda? V'ha amart Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. You told me that if it's, you remember what we said yesterday, that if it's a disputation between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, we'll go halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So you see here differently. So remember that Rav Mesharshia rejected all this principle. So he said, "Umay kushya." What's the idea that Rav disagree with those principles? Dilma Rav letlei lehanei klalei. Maybe Rav is totally disagree with these principles, and even though we follow halacha according to them, because the principles is follow Rabbi Yochanan, and whenever there is a disputation between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, we follow Rabbi Yochanan. So why Rav Mesharshia rejected those principles? So now we try to prove that all those principles that we say on behalf of Rabbi Yochanan, he himself did not agree with those principles that they say on his behalf. What does that mean? Now you see a source. Ela mehadet nan. The source of Rav Mesharshia come from Mishnah, Tractate Yevamot, page 41, and they said as follows: היבמה לא תחלוץ ולא תתייבם עד שיהיו לה 3 חודשים. You remember when we discussed the book of Ruth? If you have a circumstance, God forbid, that a woman, young woman, lost her husband, and there is no heirs, there's no children. So if you go the way that the Torah describes it in the book of Dvarim, Deuteronomy chapter 25, she is forbidden to marry out of the system, out of the family, and she needs to use the brother of her deceased husband. Meaning, if you remember, in my book of Ruth, I used the chart of the sons of Yehuda. Yehuda had 3 sons. Number 1 was Er, number 2 is Onan, number 3 is Sheila. Now, Er married Tamar, and then he passed. Now Onan has the obligation to marry Tamar. Onan basically marry her, but his intent was not to have children, and the Torah said that he died too. So basically Sheila was the last one, and Yehuda tried to postpone that marriage because it's already once, he did not know the reason, but one time they tried to do this type of Levirate marriage and didn't take place. But the whole point for our discussion is the idea that the obligation upon the brother of the deceased to perpetuate the name of the deceased within the family. Meaning, if you go, as example, the book of Ruth, when it was a big to-do with Ploni Almoni or Tov, which is, it was a Ruth that was basically connected to the family of Elimelech, and the closest relative of the deceased, over there it was also issue with property, was a fellow by the name of either Tov or Ploni Almoni, which is unknown name, or did not want to specify the name. So he was a closest relative to redeem, quote unquote, the property. How? By marrying the wife of the deceased. And since he rejected that, Boaz, in a sense, was next in line. So here we're talking about Yibum, which is Levirate marriage, in order to perpetuate the name, which means if you have 2 brothers, for our discussion, let's make it very simple. You have brother A and brother B. A passed away, so in order to have the soul of A, as the Kabbalistic rabbis tells us that there is a idea of carrying out the name, perpetuating the name by having the closest relative within the family, transmigration of the soul of the deceased, which again it's not part of our discussion today. That's the obligation upon brother B to marry. Now, if he rejected, he needs to do a chalitza, which means he needs to release her. It's a special ritual procedure with the using the shoe, etc. But then she can go ahead and she can marry outside. So they said all this process, in a sense, if the brother refused to redeem, to marry the wife of his brothers, the deceased, she is forbidden to go ahead and do this process of chalitza, or the other way around. If the brother wish to marry the wife of his brother, needs to have a period of 3 months. Why we need to have it 3 months? Because the Torah said in the book of Leviticus, if you remember, we read it in the Torah portion of last week. The Torah tells us that it is one of the heavy violations of marrying a brothers or within the family, and in that sense she is his sister-in-law. It's called Eshet Achiv, the wife of his brother. And so in other words, if she have children, let's say Tamar have a child from Er, Onan is forbidden to marry her. So here he did not have children, and he wants to cohabit with her in order to fulfill the idea of Levirate marriage. So they said that he needs to have a period of 3 months. Now, if Mr. A, before his passing, have relation with her, and she's in the early stage of pregnancy, she is forbidden to his brother, even the baby was not born yet. She may be just in the first or second or even third month of her pregnancy. Why? Because we call it Bar Kayama. That fetus eventually, hopefully, will be born, and therefore, as long as it's not clearly known that if she's pregnant or not, she's forbidden to his brother, because it may be she is pregnant with the brother and she brings out a baby from the brother. So now we understand in a sense of Levirate marriage. But how about redeeming her, which called Chalitza? So we said that a Yevama that is pregnant, we cannot have a Chalitza for her, even she miscarriage eventually. Now, if somehow they're not familiar with the halacha and they did Chalitza and eventually she miscarried the baby, she needs to have second time a process of Chalitza if she wanted to marry someone outside within the family. So what we said here, that we need to have a period of 3 months, 90 days. וכן שאר כל הנשים, and also it's applied to all the other category of women, and now it's a really practical halacha, because it happened in my almost 20 years in the United States, several cases like that women who are not familiar with the halacha, either widow or divorced, wants to go ahead and marry. Now, she just lost her husband, and she wants months later or 2 months later to marry someone. So the halacha said, לא יינשאו ולא יתארסו עד שיהיו להם 3 חודשים. And that's very important to remember, that they cannot make it before 90 days after either the get took place or the passing of the period of mourning, etc., and altogether after burial has to be 90 days. Can you give me an idea what's involved here?
With the 90 days?
Yes.
Well, as to why they wait the 90 days? Or, well, I mean, if she were pregnant with from the previous marriage, it would be important to wait a little while to determine who the father was.
Excellent. Not just what the father was, but also to have a clear status. It's many possibilities. She can miscarriage, she can have a baby. In our modern days, you even know if it's really the father, who is the father, which is a side note, etc. But in that time, in the Talmudic time, it was 2 different stages. One, it's called Eirusin, which many times they call it Kiddushin, and one is a Nisuin. Nowadays, when you said Hareat Mekudeshet, you are consecrated me toward this ring, so that's his Maaseh Kiddushin. And nowadays we combine both parts together. In the time of the Talmud, they used to wait a period of time between the engagement to the marriage, and usually it was a year period. So he said, Echad betulot ve'echad be'ulot, regardless if they are virgin or they already not virgin, which means they already have relations. Echad almanot ve'echad grushot, regardless if it's a widow or divorcee, meaning from the first husband. Echad arusot ואחד נשואות. So the Gemara in Yevamot explain how a person was, how she is basically a married woman but still virgin. Either, for example, they have engagement, and usually the woman at that stage was a virgin, and then she remained in that state until she get married, etc. This type of circumstance. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Nesuot yit'arsu va'arusot yinas'u. He said that women that marry to their first husband, even you may concern that they may be pregnant from the first husband, but they can go ahead and engage with the next one, which is either the brother or redeem and someone else right after she lost her husband or divorce, because according to halakha, especially practical halakha in those days, women that engage to their husband, they are forbidden to their husbands until they do the canopy, the chuppah, and final stage of nisu'in. So therefore, she cannot get pregnant from the second one. And if it turned that she is pregnant and deliver a baby, it will not be a question whom this baby belongs to. So he hold to the extreme that even the day that she get divorced, she can go ahead the same day, for the sense of exaggeration, and engaged to someone else, right? But as far as getting final stage of married, she needs to wait 3 months. Now, if after she got married, she have a baby from the first one, such as if it passed, let's say, several months, and it turned that she delivered a baby, so you know clearly that that's the baby from the first husband. Why? Because it's from the second husband. The minimum amount to put the baby in incubator has to be at least 6 months, a fetus in the mother's womb. Because Rashi said that any fetus that come out of the mother's womb that it's less than 7 months will not survive. So now we said chutz me'arusa shebiuda. You see that I'm a little slow on this because I want to make sure that we all understand. Excluding from the one who engaged that mipnei shelibo gasba. So in that time in the tribe of Yehuda, they used to have the yichud, which means the time that they are together, the bride and the groom, before they get to the chuppah. So libo gasba, which means he is basically feel comfortable to go ahead and have relation with her because they get used to each other. So he said that's what I'm saying is excluding that community. Rabbi Yossi Omer, כל האנשים יתרסו חוץ מן האלמנה מפני העיבול. He said, I'm differentiating between divorcee and widow. Widows have a special requirement, which is she have to mourn over the passing of her husband.
30 days.
30 days. You know the story about the rabbi that officiated a funeral, and the man was sobbing and crying over loss of his wife, and they went to the cemetery. He was crying, and then when it's all over, the rabbi took him aside and said, I knew that you didn't get along with her so much. Why are you crying so badly? he says, why she didn't pass early? Why now? Anyway, see, it's appear here that she have the obligation to mourn over her husband. She cannot skip that, regardless. You see how the sages are smart, right?
Wish to have it earlier.
Yes, regardless to the relationship they have between the two. So he said, all the women that divorced, they allowed to go ahead and engage right away after the divorce. They do not need to wait at all, even they are married to the first husband, but they should not get married right away if they are in a state of widow. The Amrinan. So we said it happens one time situation. Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Lazar lo al beit midrasha. One day he didn't attend the house of study. Ashkechel Rabbi Asi de Avakain. He saw Rabbi Asi who stand there. Amar lei, ma yamur bebeit midrasha? What did they talk in the yeshiva, in the Beit HaMidrash? Amar lei, hacha amar Rabbi Yochanan lacha keRabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yochanan said, lacha according to Rabbi Yossi, that he allow engagement right away in all type of category, excluding a widow, the period of mourning. Michlal, the yechidai paligalei. Now back to our subject. What happened? That we understand from Rabbi Yochanan that one disagree or Rabbi Yossi and not many. And you remember what we said? That if you go that way, Rabbi Yochanan did not hold according to Rabbi Yossi against everyone else. So the Gemara said, Ein, this is really one individual opinion. Are you sure about it? They said, Ve'atanya. Now we're going to see different every avenue, different situation that women are not pregnant to the first husband, such as they have a fight or she have an issue of fertility, etc. And even though, according to Rabbi Meir, they cannot get engaged until they wait a 3 months period. And that's important part of our discussion to remember that that's also practical halacha. הרי שהייתה רדופה ללך לבית אביה, he said, if the woman is basically, they use the word redufa, eager to go to her father's house. There's a few ways to understand it, but either you said that they constantly disagree, or she gets used, let's say if the parents are not well and she's spending a lot of time with the parents, etc. But in Hebrew, when they use the word raduf, lirdof, which means someone who's really eager to pursue something, or shaya la kasim bala, they have a fight, and so therefore we have the assumption that they do not have a relation for 3 months period before his passing. Or shaya bala zaken, he was an elderly person, or chole, he has issues and he was not well. Just for the sake of understanding, God forbid, imagine that the husband go through a chemotherapy. So it's obvious that there's a lot of side effect for going to that procedure. And part of that is losing the ability to have children many times. So since he go to that procedure, so or shaita hi chola, or if she was ill, akara, meaning she barren of children, she cannot have children. How do you know that? So Rashi said that there's a point that's called chazaka. Chazaka meaning something that happened 3 times, we hold that as a permanent. What is chazaka here? If she married 3 men and she never get pregnant, so we hold that she cannot have children, because it was a 3 process. Remember, that's before a modern science research of eggs, etc., etc. But basically, if she married 3 men, she couldn't have children. We have the assumption that she have issues. Next.
Reasonable.
Next, yes. or the other way, zkena, if she's elderly lady. Or, and you can say, how about Sarah? Sarah was an exception, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a certain age that we all know that it's difficult for women to have children, and a certain age that is impossible nowadays to have children. Or ktana, which means the Mishnah tells us in Ketubot that the father can marry his young daughter. So if she is a baby, in a sense she is very young in age, ve'ailonit, which means a woman that did not show any sign of adult, which means she have a body in a sense that never grows in a level of like a baby, God forbid, like a Down syndrome or all kind of autistic situations, that she cannot have independent children by the way that the body looks like. ושאינה ראויה לליד, as we said, או שהיה בעלה חבוש בבית האסורים, or the husband was in jail for 3 months, so therefore it's clear that he did not left her pregnant, or המפלת לאחר מיתת בעלה, or she have a miscarriage right after her husband passing, so her husband passed away, and now, day later, she miscarried a baby. So you know for sure that she is not pregnant now. Or, all this example, כולן צריכים להמתין 3 חודשים דברי רב מאיר. רב מאיר said, makes no difference. 3 months, that's it. So you may ask a question, look, there are some situations that it's so clear. He says, no, 3 months. Why? Because even she deliver a child, you know clearly that this baby is from the current second husband. The sages did not want to differentiate, and they put a general rule, and that's it. So even sometimes it's really a big question, and a question within the question. Rabbi Yossi matir le'ares u'lnaseh miyad. Rabbi Yossi disputed, and he said no. In those circumstances we just mentioned earlier, they can go ahead and engage or marry right away, and there is no need to wait 3 months, because most probably they are not pregnant. So since
Rav Yossi holds then only in those circumstances you don't have to wait 3 months. Otherwise, under other circumstances, you would have to wait 3 months.
No, Rabbi Yossi said
you never have to wait 3 months.
Yes, which means
okay.
He said that since, especially in this, basically Rabbi Yossi speaks here about the cases that was brought by Rabbi Meir, and he said all those cases that you are mentioning, I disagree.
Right.
I allow them to go ahead and marry right away, because they most probably are not.
Right.
It's the probability is so high that they're not pregnant. I'll allow them to go ahead and marry right away. Which means the one who disagree with Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, that it's individual against many. So the Gemara asks, Lama li? Right, Rabbi Yochanan need to say that halacha is according to Rabbi Yossi. Veha amart Rabbi Meir veRabbi Yossi halacha keRabbi Yossi. You said clearly earlier on behalf of Rabbi Yochanan that when is a disputation between Rabbi Yossi, we go halacha by Rabbi Yossi. So why you need to say it? So he said, Umay kushya. What is the question? Dilma le'apuke mid Rav Nachman amar Shmuel, de'amar halacha keRabbi Meir bigzerotav. He hold that when Rabbi Meir put a gzera, a decree, a borderline, in order to avoid people from violation, and others disagree, we go by halacha according to Rabbi Meir. So it's possibility that Rabbi Yochanan hold that principle, and this one was one of the decree of Rabbi Meir. So therefore, it's proper to follow in halacha the Rabbi Meir. So now we need to bring another source, and he said Ela me'aretanya. So now we're dealing with a different story, but again we try to juxtapose and bring a proof to Rav Misharshia. What is the discussion? They said it was in a time that it was heavily idol worshippers. The Gemara said in Avodah Zarah that there are certain days before the idol worshippers celebration, we are forbidden to have interaction in the sense of business interaction. Why? Because if they will be happy with the result of our business with them, what they're going to do? They're going to take their money and serve the idols. And that is forbidden. It's not only part of the 613 commandment, it's also even in the Noahide laws, the idol worshipping. So they said, now what happened is they have a marketplace that people have sometimes the business in the marketplace. So they ask a question, can you go ahead and have interaction the days before their day of idol worshipping? So they said, הולכים ליריד של נוכרים ולוקחים מהם בהמה ועבדים ושפחות בתים שדות וכרמים. So you can go to the market of the non-Jews and you can purchase whatever need can be in those days, animal, servants, maid, houses, field, etc. וחוטב ומעלה בערכאות שלהם. You can write a contract with them and you go to their civil court, non-Jewish civil court, and they can sign that agreement. So now you think, oh, we are in this way recognize indirectly their court. So they may go and say thank you to their idols. So they said here, מפני שהוא כמציל מידן, because he is basically saving his property from their hand. Why? Because sometimes when you make an agreement, you need to go to a court to notarize it, or to get a final approval by the court, especially if it's a large property. So the fear is that if you don't do that, he may back off, the idol worshipper backed off, and therefore there are certain rare exceptional opportunity that you lose if you don't do that. Ve'im haya kohen. So basically the sages said that is a special decree of impurity outside of Eretz Israel, because the Rambam explained in those days it wasn't a sign on a grave. In our days you see the name of the deceased, sometimes they write you a story of the deceased. In those days the Rambam said they used to bury whatever it is, open, boom, bury, goodbye. And it wasn't any sign. And therefore the sages said that it's all considering a state of ritual impurity. In Eretz Israel they are very strict to put the name of the deceased, even a small simple plaque, but something there, so you recognize for simple reason, because it was an issue of ritual impurity, such as Kohen passing that cemetery. So all that decree was because a ritual impurity involved with the deceased, with the corpse. So the Kohen has a special warning. So he cannot basically at that time leave Eretz Israel to a land that maybe they just dropped the dead without any sign. So since all of that law of ritual impurity is only rabbinic, because from the Torah you don't need to worry if you do not know that there is a gravesite there, so therefore the sages are more lenient to, if it's a situation of maybe lost a large sum of money, allow the Kohen to go to outside of Eretz Israel, because it was a rabbinic decree against leaving. So he said, ואם היה כהן מטמא בחוץ לארץ לדון ולערער עמהם כשם שמטמא בחוץ לארץ כך מטמא בבית הקברות. So the same way is outside of Eretz Israel you have a ritual impurity, the same applied to the cemetery. So they ask, בית הקברות סגלתך טומאה דאורייתא היא. So you're going to tell me that the Kohen allowed to go to the cemetery in order to have money? This is a biblical. the Torah forbids for a Kohen to go to the cemetery. So in order to avoid a monetary loss, you're allowed to do it. It said, Ela bebet apras de Rabbanan. We explained earlier, if you remember, in 26, just watch us in 26, all is the bet apras, that it's basically rabbinic. So the Gemara said, Umetameh lisa isha velilmod Torah. You remember we said that there are certain circumstances that a person can leave Eretz Israel. So they said here, if all of that is in order to marry or to study Torah, which means all it's rabbinic, so it's not override because of potential to lose money. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Matai, when he allowed to do it, to leave to outside of Eretz Israel or Beit HaPras in order to study Torah, Bizman she'en motzeh lilmod, if he find only a teacher that he fully comprehend in those places. Aval motzeh lilmod lo yetameh. But if he can find a teacher without crossing those places, he cannot do it. Rabbi Yossi Omer Av bizman shemotzeh lilmod nami yetameh, even that if you have a teacher that he can learn in this place, still if he feel that he'll be more successful in study by someone else, he allowed to go in the ritual impurity that is rabbinic in order to study Torah. Why? Lefi 47b she'ein min hakol zoche adam lilmod. Let's face it, some teachers are hard to comprehend, some are short and sweet and clear, some complicated, it's hard. So there are certain students that learn better by different teachers, and therefore for the case of study Torah, you can go ahead and study specifically in a certain location. Many poskim hold that way, that a person should go by the best teacher. ואמר רבי יוסי, מעשה יוסף הכהן שהלך אצל רבו לציידן כדי ללמוד תורה. So you see a story of a fellow that went to, he was a Kohen and he went to the city of Tzaidan, which is outside of Eretz Israel, in order to study Torah. Even there are many rabbis, many teachers in Eretz Israel to teach him. אמר רבי יוחנן הלכה כרבי יוסי. ולמה לי? Why he needs to hold the halacha according to Rabbi Yossi? והאמרת רבי יוסי ורבי יהודה ורבי יוסי הלכה כרבי יוסי. Remember we said it? That you always go in that sense by Rabbi Yossi. אמר רבי איצטריך. You need to rule even in this one according to Rabbi Yossi. Why סגל אתה חמינא נמילה במתניתין, אבל בברייתא המה לא. So you may say that that's apply only in the Mishnah, but in the Braita, like for example, if the Kohen allowed to become ritually impure outside of Eretz Israel in order to study Torah from a specific rabbi, Kamash Melan, then Rabbi Yochanan wants to tell us that the halacha is according to Rabbi Yossi. Even they have this disputation in this Braita, like the same thing. So this halachot is not followed by everyone, because Rav doesn't hold these principles. So it means, so we're back to our subject, that the non-Jew, you can carry his item any place, even exceeded more than 2,000 cubit. Leman, if it's according to sages is clear. Why? Now the ownerless property doesn't have a owner, and kulim shvita, so they don't have independent residency. Because the non-Jew, they have an owner. So you cannot say that this idea of shvita. So it means that the same rules that apply to that item apply to the owners. Mibaya, you're going to tell me that they have independence resident? Ela alibad Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. We go by Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that said that ownerless property have a shvita, a prominent place. The Kamash Melan and Shmuel come and teach us Eimar de Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that any items that in ownership of a fellow Jew, konim shvita, that's applied to ownerless property that doesn't have an owner, but but a property that belongs to a non-Jew, and they have ownership law, which means that they do not have shvita independently, because it's the property has the same value and the same ownership as its owner. Meiti Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar Omer, השואל כלי מן הנוכרי. Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar said, if a fellow Jew borrowed a utensil from a non-Jew, and B'Yom Tov, during the festival, and because in Shabbat you cannot carry items, Rashi said, even within the domain, because there is a prohibition against carrying a public domain. But Yom Tov you allow if you need it for the purpose of Yom Tov. So he said, if someone lent to a non-Jew any utensil before Yom Tov, and he returned, the non-Jew returned to him during the festival, and also it's applied to utensils and other treasure, which means even that it's ownerless, ששבתו בתוך התחום, that it's within the Shabbat limit, יש להם 2,000 אמה לכל רוח. You can go ahead and have 2,000 cubit to each direction. So he said, ונוכרי שהביא לו פירות מחוץ לתחום, if a non-Jew brought to a Jew produce outside of the Shabbat domain, הרי זה לא יזזן ממקומם. So a Jew may not move it from its place because it's only 4 cubit. And the Rashba said that that's applied to the not only to the owner but to anyone else. Even he gave it to a specific person. So he said, if you tell me that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri hold that objects belonging to a non-Jew do not acquire residence in, according to his opinion, is this Braita Hamani. So Rashi said, Hamani, Dektane, Chefze Nochri Konim Shvita Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Klomar Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar, Ali ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Amar. So I explained here in the book Berak Klomar Berash Lashas that it's a long explanation, but basically the reason for the Klomar is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was much earlier than him, in many generations earlier. Read it in the book. So anyway, excuse me. So they said Hamani, who is this Braita hold? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that he, Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar, hold the same. If you tell me that it's all the same, that the ownership of a non-Jew do not carry that shvita Hamani, lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri v'lo Rabbanan, because you can go neither way, neither Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri nor Rabbanan, because this, according to the sages, anything that it's ownerless, any property that is ownerless, it's have the din of shvita. For sure, any item that belongs to a non-Jew does not have this category. So we said, Le'olam kasav Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri chefze nochri konim shvita, because it's equal to something that it's ownerless. Now, Shmuel damar k'Rabbanan, and Shmuel that hold that the item belonged to a non-Jew did not have this idea of shvita, he all the same as the sages. V'dekamar k'Rabbanan pshita. And what we said according to the sages is clear. Ma'u detema be'alim denochri. You may say that the sages should issue a decree in a case of a non-Jew owner. Atu be'alim di Israel. So it's people carry object belonging to a Jewish owner beyond the 2,000 cubit limit. Kamash Melan, so Shmuel come to teach us that we don't have this type of decree at all these issues. So therefore, all these dinim of tchumim don't apply to a non-Jew. Rabbi Chia bar Ravina Rabbi Yochanan Cheftzei Nochri Konim Shvita. He said that objects that belong to a non-Jew indeed acquire resident. Why? Because he said Gzeira, this is an affirmation, this is a decree, Be'alim de Nochri, that the non-Jewish owner Atu Be'alim de Israel. So we make this affirmation that that since we allow the non-Jew, people think that it's applied to a Jew as well. Bring a story. Hanhu the dichrei the atu lemavrachta. So it means that it was a certain rams that were brought to the town of Mavrachta on Shabbat by a non-Jew. Shara Rava levnei Mechoza lemizban minayu. So it was people from the city of Mechoza that visited Mavrachta, and Rava allowed to purchase those rams on festival for the purpose of slaughtering them the same day of festival, because we explained that that's ochel nefesh. You're allowed to go on a festival and slaughter an animal and eat it for the purpose of eating on that day of the festival. So the condition is only that the money, the final payment, you should pay after the festival. But basically the non-Jew trusted the Jews who purchased from them those rams, that they're going to pay them according to Meiri right after the festival. So Amar le Ravina le Rava, mai da'atech? Ravina asked Rava, what is the idea that you hold this way? It's because the Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Cheftzei Nochri en konim shvita, Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan alachak Rabbi Yochanan. We just said that if it's a disputation between Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan, we follow Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ravina Amar Rabbi Yochanan Cheftzei Nochri konim shvita. Why? Gzera be'alim de Nochri adu be'alim de Israel. He said that objects that belong to a non-Jew acquire residence based on the decree that the case of a non-Jewish owner due to the case of a Jewish owner, and the halacha is according to his opinion. Hadar Amar Rava. So Rava came again and said, Lizdabnu livnei Mavrachta. So when he heard that, he says that only people in Mavrachta can do that. Why? Dechula Mavrachta liduk arba modam. Because the entire Mavrachta have the din, have the law, it's like 4 cubits of them. But the resident of Mechoza, he cannot sell it, and it's the halacha follow the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. So we're now going to a practical halachot. First halacha is a Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer, and that's very important practical halacha. It's hamtana lifnei nisuim, the waiting period before getting married. Any woman who was married or engaged must wait 3 months to remarry after her husband's death or after her bill of divorce, the get, was written. The Rama said, based on Tur and the Rosh, that that after she received the divorce, again, it's crucial to make sure that she's not pregnant. This applies even if there is no reason to suspect that the woman is pregnant, such as if she lived apart from her husband or incapable of conceiving. That's by the way, the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan we mentioned during our study, and he followed Rabbi Meir, and it's also the way that Shmuel said on behalf of Rabbi Meir. Another important halacha, it's Yevama lo tachlotz. A widow must wait 3 months, follow the death of her husband, before participating in the ceremony that frees her from Levirate bond. It's called chalitza. However, if she participates in a chalitza ceremony within this time period and is subsequently found not to be pregnant, her chalitza is valid, But again, this is the big discussion in Ramah, Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer 164. Another discussion is that dealing with idolaters. So one is permitted to go to a market fair held in honor of idolatry in order to purchase things for the local farmer, especially if refraining from doing so will cause him significant financial loss. However, he may not buy from a merchant at such a fair, since a part of his profits may go to idolatry. Shulchan Aruch Edea 149. A Kohen, he basically cannot go to a cemetery. So, but he permitted to become ritually impure with rabbinic impurity if he walk to an area which is uncertainly, it's called beta pras. For example, if you go to a place you don't know, they just bury people and they don't put any marker there. So it's a rabbinic prohibition. The next one is the object that belong to a non-Jew. Object that belong to a non-Jew established resident in the spot where they are located, and permitted for a Jew to move them only for 2,000 cubits in each direction. So that's we talk when we discuss Eruvei Chatzerot, and we said the same thing that apply to if we make those type of Eruv, the big question is, when you have an Eruv in a certain domain, if that Eruv is considering an Eruv or not. So we explain that as an example, it was a big to-do with Manhattan, New York, that the late Rav Kotler have an issue with that Eruv because of the circumstance there, and he was very strongly opposed. Moshe Feinstein, he said that you don't need to express your oppositions, but it still have an issue. And by the way, at the funeral of Rav Kotler, they mentioned that that it was a very wealthy people that threatened him that they're going to stop the sponsorship of his yeshiva in Lakewood, New Jersey, because he is opposing the Eruv in Manhattan. And he said that it's better not to have the sponsorship, not to have the money, but not to violate the law of Shabbat. So that was part of the eulogy for the late Rav Kotler.